Good morning, everybody, for our Sunday morning here. I know people are waking up, and this is sort of a death zone at the crack of dawn for many of us who've partied through the night. But thank you all for coming. I'm absolutely delighted to have two amazing speakers and historians with us. Josephine Quinn, who some of you would have heard before either in this festival or the earlier festival. She's been a festival regular. And delighted to welcome Rubén for the first time all the way from Spain, from the IE University. And thank you so much for being here for the first time, Rubén. Let me start off by setting the context of this. I said to them, so what got you interested in history? Because I remember when I was getting admission into St. Stephen's College and they gave me admission into history, I was like, oh, please, I'm not going to do history. It's the most boring thing ever. But now, of course, I've changed my mind because I love history. But Josephine, why history? And what got you sort of hooked to it? And why did you cut your hair?
I think that's I had a similar experience. Maybe I went to state schools in Britain, in the Midlands, in Britain, and history was. They had just changed the way that history was taught in Britain. They brought in this completely new syllabus, and it was all about understanding and empathizing with your local history, which was great if you were based somewhere interesting. But unfortunately, I lived in a really boring town, and we had months and months of writing essays, imagining that we were framework knitters in Ruddington. And this totally put me off history. And so I didn't do it. I didn't do an A-level in history. I was a linguist. I went to universities to do ancient languages. I didn't realize these places had histories. I was just interested in the languages. And then one day I realized I had to take a history course. You had to do one course just to prove you didn't like it. Take a history course, and 10 minutes into my first tutorial, I was completely hooked. Then I realized that there were people who actually get paid to teach this stuff. There aren't just students at universities. There are also lecturers, and that's a job, and you get, well, not very much, but a bit of money for it. And if you're a Roman historian, you get to go to Rome, and you get to look at ancient remains all day, which is pretty great. And then you get to eat ice cream in the evenings. And that was it. I was done. I was sold.
Rubén.
Well, in my case, it's in Spain. It's a different context, but it was learning everything from memory, and I wasn't quite liking that. And I got to go to Rome when I was 15. I fell in love with Rome. And when I was 18, I did my first trip to Pompeii with a project there. I think that was the combination and kind of an addition to what I was learning history at university in Spain. And that's the moment when I decided to not just do history, I'm an historian, but also move towards archaeology, because for me it was like encountering antiquity. Obviously, at my level with 18 years old, I didn't know much about archaeology, but it had that romantic feeling that I think Pompeii has for everyone. And that's how I got into this combination of history and archaeology. And then I decided to leave Spain to move to the UK because I thought that was the proper path to pursue. Here I am now, so thank you.
So do you see yourself as an archaeologist or historian, or an archaeologist historian, or a historian archaeologist?
I don't know. I think I should ask people how they see myself. I think something in between. I do like a lot archaeology. I do like a lot history. I try to combine both approaches. But recently I've been more into archaeology because that's what I'm currently teaching and I'm working with. So,
the reason I ask that is, a lot of the archaeologists think that they're doing the real cheese, the big job, and these historians just sit around sort of faffing about writing pieces on what they have actually done, which is the reason I asked that. But Josephine, your book, How the World Made the West, is such an interesting concept because all of us, certainly in the East, used to look at the West as this, oh my God, they were born with civilization, forgetting for a second that even places like Edinburgh in the early 19th or early 20th century or late 19th century, at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, still open their windows, and the town crier called out, and then you took out your pails of slop, of shit and piss, and dumped it on the street, 3,000 years after Mohenjo-Daro. Tell us the idea behind how the world made the West.
So the basic idea is to debunk the notion of Western civilization as a self-made miracle. Basically, the idea that it's got its roots in Greece and Rome, or in northern Germany, if you're a bit of a Nazi, but somewhere kind of within Europe, that's where this European Western civilization must come from. And it's also trying to draw attention to the fact that the reason that it looks like it's very easy to see the West as sort of super civilized in the 18th and 19th centuries is that Western intellectuals invent the idea of civilization. So, of course, they imagine that the most civilized thing is to be most like them. So the whole game is rigged, basically, the game I call civilizational thinking. So what I'm trying to do in this book is turn that around and say, no, this place we call the West, this culture, this set of societies in the modern world has an incredibly complex set of roots and ideas and inspirations and borrowings, and that all comes out of contact between people. If people don't make contact with each other, it doesn't have to be positive contact. It can be trade, it can be diplomacy, it can also be sex, but it can also be war. I mean, any way people get in contact with each other, you're swapping ideas, and that's how people change. And if people don't change, they all stay the same, then there's no history, and I'm out of a job. So I'm trying to tell the story of how you get to the West over 4,000 years, from the 3rd millennium BCE, up to the age of discovery, age of exploration, whatever we want to call it, through journeys and relationships, essentially.
So here we have this, she's talking about ideas and people moving. So this is the first map we have. Can you see it? Is it on your screen? Yes? So this is the first map. What's the story that we are seeing here?
Okay, so people often say now, oh, well, there's trade between the Mediterranean and India. People are beginning to understand that the Indian Ocean things are going on there at the same time as things are going on in the Mediterranean and vice versa. So you're beginning to get this idea of a kind of connected world. What I want to show with this map is, and this is a map, this isn't just a kind of modern made-up map. This is a map, it's mapping incredible text from the Roman period, a text written in Greek called the Periplus, or the sail around of the Red Sea. And what the Greeks called the Red Sea was basically the Indian Ocean, the Western Indian Ocean, including what we call the Red Sea. And every dot on this map is a port that's mentioned. I mean, there are more.
Every blue dot.
Every blue dot is a port that's mentioned in this kind of gazetteer. Each one has a long explanation: who's the king, does trade work here, what different sea monsters come out to meet you as you sail into the port. And basically, it's for merchants from Egypt who are coming down from the Red Sea, dealing then up to the Mediterranean, and how they can plan their journeys, not just to 1 or 2 ports in India or Arabia and so on, but how they can plan them to up to 100 ports, all the way down the coast of East Africa as well. And I think to me, it's just an extraordinary world of interconnection and entanglement that goes way beyond the idea of, a little bit of international trade or a little bit of contact. This is a completely interconnected world in the ancient period.
So just to sort of mention, if you look at the map closely, you'll see cloth in Bengal, just above the Ganges, where it says Ganges. It says spices all the way down in the Dakhina Sagar area. It looks at cloth and iron and copper above. And then if you look on the other side, in Africa, again, it tells you spices, cinnamon, slaves. Yeah. It gives you pearls. It gives you wine and grain. And it gives you frankincense. So, and there you've got dates also somewhere. I forget what the dates were. I think it was somewhere in Persia. Didn't you have dates being being traded.
And the thing is that this text, that we have this extraordinary text, it actually tells you where these things come from. So you find, on the coast of Africa, you'll find out that in one port, they like Italian wine. In another port, they like Indian cotton. Then there are ports in India where at one port, the king will happily send people to buy silver and gold and clothes from the Mediterranean. But at the next one down, they won't take any second-hand clothes. So incredible detail of exactly this world where people have so much knowledge when they set out on these voyages. These are not voyages into the unknown at all. And they're going in both directions. So we have all sorts of Roman pottery, coins, and so on in India, but equally a huge amount of Indian pottery, sculpture, teak, so some of the boats are actually Indian cotton in the sails, in Egyptian ports. So it's a completely interconnected two-way world.
And no drugs yet.
It doesn't say so.
What is this one?
So this is just to show a bit of the kind of political, it's essentially the same area.
So this is still first century Common Era.
Exactly. This is the world of the Roman Empire, but there's so much else going on. There's all that trade. There's also the great empire of Aksum in Ethiopia. It's just beginning its rise. Incredible obelisks, extraordinary empire. Some of the earliest coinage in Africa comes from there. You've got the Parthians. People called the Romans and the Parthians the two eyes of the world. They were considered equal empires, equally powerful. And in a way, the Parthians were even more powerful and wealthy because they could control the trade routes through the Persian Gulf. And then you've got India, a series of empires, and in this period, kind of empires based in central India. And then over in China, you've got the Han Empire. And that's this is only kind of picking out probably the four biggest. There are lots of other stories there too. But so this is a story of individual traders and sailors and small ports, but it's also a story of enormous empires all coexisting and in some form of contact with each other. Not so much contact between China and Rome directly, but indirectly. They all know about each other, even vaguely, and they're all at least in direct contact.
And this is what they traveled in, up and down the Red Sea into
Yes.
what we know as the Indian Ocean.
This is one of our earliest detailed images of a sailing ship in the Mediterranean. So sailing is invented on the Nile in Egypt, and that works very well because the Nile has a strong current in one direction and winds in the other direction. So it's a great place. You can the current will take you out, and then the winds will bring you back. And then about 2,500, Egyptians start bringing these ships out into the open sea, into the Mediterranean, up the Levantine coast to places like Byblos, and down the Red Sea as well. And this is one of these ships. This is actually from a tomb of an Egyptian official at Sahure, about 2,500 BCE. And what I love about it is, I'm not sure how much detail you can see here, but you've got the mast that's being stowed. It's sort of down because it's clearly in port. They're loading the boat. You've got oars as well for steering and propulsion. You've got trusses on the boat itself to keep it really rigid. And then you've got these people. You've got a guy at the top who's got a kind of what we call a pudding bowl haircut in England. That's a kind of Egyptian haircut. Got these guys with longer hair. They'll be from the Levant. That's the kind of typical way of depicting somebody from the Levant. And then you've got these small people. And, who are they? Are they enslaved people who are often depicted a bit smaller? Are they even children? What's going on there? Other images like this, you have monkeys. They're not actually sailing the ship.
And what's the squigglies on top? The sort of wavy things.
That's the mast.
No, those three.
Oh, I see. So I think that is going to be a kind of schematic depiction of mountains. So the idea is this import, and then you've got the land beyond, and you've got at the bottom, you can see there's all the kind of hatching, and that's the sea down there. So it's all very schematic to show you this is a ship import. Yeah.
And now, so this is 2500 BC, and we're now going to 100 Common Era, where we find the Bernike Buddha.
Yeah, so this is back in that world of the Roman Empire, the Han Empire, this incredible trade across the Western Indian Ocean. And what is amazing, this is discovered actually in a few pieces between 2018 and 2022. I think they found it in about 4 pieces at Berenike, which is a Red Sea port on the coast of Egypt. And obviously, it's a Buddha, and it's a Buddha in a style that was quite popular in around that time in the Gandharan, in sort of north.
In the Gandhara period, in the Gandhara tradition.
Yeah, so Central Asia, North India. But the facial features are rather Greek looking, and it's got this sort of halo around its head. There's a sort of Egyptian thing. And the marble comes from Turkey. So this is actually made in Berenike. It's made in Egypt. This little Buddha, it's almost certainly made for one of the Indian traders who lives in Berenike. But then it was found in a temple of Isis, an Egyptian temple of Isis, which we know from another inscription was built by an Italian. So this is a world of extraordinary shared kind of artistic ideas, religious ideas, where people are mixing to an incredible degree, but at the same time, keeping their own traditions. There's also a lot of Indian cooking pots in Berenike. There's mung beans, the things that basically Egyptians don't eat, but they're bringing cooking and so on and gods. But then they're kind of sharing these knowledges with the people around them. So I just love it's actually I call it the Berenike Buddha. There's now another 3 bits of other Buddhas from Berenike, so it's not a one-off either.
Rubén, tell us a little bit about how, when there was trade, as we are seeing in all these ships, how these trade ships carried with them not just people and ivory and elephants and so on and so forth, but carried ideas, culture, tradition, and in this case, religion.
Well, it all happens especially after Augustus, when they open these borders. They get Egypt as a province, and they open these trade routes towards this part of the world, and it's basically a revolution. So it's an explosion in this globalized back then world, where they start to reach all these different ports. We do have this trade route that Josephine was talking about before, but we do have so many different graffiti, as you can see here in this slide, not only in these kind of outer parts of the Roman world, outside what we consider the borders of the Roman world, but also at the center of this empire, what we call the Roman Empire. Here you have this graffiti from Ostia that is showing a Greek ship, and is been a testimony of this trade. But we do have, comparing this with nowadays, these different spots across the Mediterranean that could be like our Amazon hubs from nowadays, where they are bringing all these goods that we know of through literary descriptions.
Warehouses, Amazon warehouses.
Yeah, especially this one at Ostia we're talking before. Like, this is a graffiti from Ostia, but we do have architecturally a huge square full of different shops, different spaces, where each corporation, each trader is bringing goods from different parts of the Roman world, and they are kind of like ordering all the goods that are getting into this port, that when then being redirected to the city of Rome, to other parts of Italy, or in this case, for example, even to Spain or ancient Hispania. So we are dealing with a very complex, interconnected world where people are moving not only themselves physically, but also ideas, symbols. And we do find that not only in temples, as we just saw with the Buddha, but also inside houses, in the art that they scratch on the walls. These are like the Twitter or the X from the Roman Empire, where everyone was scratching the walls. And we do have millions in some places like Pompeii, but other archaeological sites where they are like just giving us like a first kind of face-to-face encountering antiquity and how they were seeing this changing world, that not only in styles, but also in ideas.
You know, one of the things that fascinates me is that artists and artisans are seen as losers. But whether it's graffiti or even this wonderful mosaic, this is what you look at to be able to build a history.
This is one of my favorite things. So we're in Ostia now, the port of Rome, right at the heart of the Roman Empire. And in Ostia, of course, it's a big...
Can you just date this for a second?
So this is going to be, again, we're in sort of 100, 200 CE, that sort of era. And we're at the height of Roman trade. And Ostia is a very big port and a lot of independent operators there. There are shipping firms, there are merchant firms. And in what's called the square of the corporations by archaeologists now, they all have these little stands. It's like a modern marketplace where everyone has the place they set their stall up. And the way that they kind of show which little plot belongs to, like right around here, which one belongs to which...
So Festival Bazaar, Kartike
exactly
Design
like
Company.
Bazaar.
This is that sign.
It's exactly, and it's on the ground. It's a mosaic, and they'll have their title of "This is who we are," it's our company, and they'll have some kind of cartoon that shows you what they do. So I love this one because it's an elephant, but it's not an Indian elephant, because above it you can see the word Sabrata. These are the shippers from Sabrata in North Africa, in modern Libya. So one of the things they can ship for you, probably not very often, but if you really want one, you can afford it, they can ship you a North African elephant.
And one of the things, again, to distinguish the North African elephant, as you can see, is the big ears, as opposed to the Asian elephant. What's interesting is you don't see a tusk here, which is the reason why they also, the whole ivory trade was a big deal, if you remember the first map. Moving forward, now we come to Pompeii, and we talk about the freed woman of Lucius.
So I'm going to pass over to Rubén for most of the Pompeii stuff, but I just wanted to tell you about this because I love this tomb for so many reasons. And perhaps the most obvious one is it's got a great big ship on it.
Can you see the ship detail in the tombstone?
Yep. Excellent, well done. It's got this wonderful ship, and so this guy, Gaius Munatius Faustus, the husband, is something in shipping. Whether he's a captain himself or he owns a shipping company, somehow that's how he made his money. There's also probably a bit of a game going on here about the ship of life and crossing over from life to death and so on, but mostly this is going to be about his profession. But this is such a wonderful monument because it's set up by free people. So both this guy, this very successful professional who's got his wealthy tomb, but also his wife, who actually commissions the tomb for him, and eventually for her too. They're free people. They've made this incredible social journey, which is another thing that happens, to an amazing degree in antiquity. You can, this world of trade and exchange was one of the few ways that ex-slaves could actually bring themselves up in the world, and their children were full Roman citizens. So
did they have to buy their freedom, or did they earn their freedom, or both?
It depended. Some of them could buy their freedom. Quite often, what they would do is if they could have one child that the master could then take on, then they were often allowed to go free because, of course, unless you're doing a desk job, essentially, which of course some slaves were, you're not that much use after a certain age, and they still have to feed you and so on. So actually, it can be in the master's, it's a horrible thing to say, but it can be in the master's interest to free their slaves, just to save on continuing to feed them. But this, I just love this tomb because it sort of sums up for me everything about this world of ports and trade and social mobility, as well as commercial mobility, and that women could play a big role in this. The woman is in charge of all of this.
And that brings us to this photograph, Rubén.
Well, we all know this photograph, right? Like it's Pompeii and the amazing ruins of the Roman city of Pompeii. That I think is a changing point in classical archaeology, also in Roman history, because of the quantity of data and the quality of data that we are still getting from these excavations, and that help us historians and archaeologists to rethink how we approach antiquity and how we write and rewrite our own stories. And I think this is important to know, because sometimes we make an interpretation, we'll see this later, we have to go back years later to rethink how we are approaching antiquity and what new is there in the data that we're getting. And we have been getting this kind of amazing details and data for 300 years almost. I think there is a need still to go back and critically assess again the evidence.
So the funny thing, Rubén, is that we look at Pompeii from the point of the explosion of Mount Vesuvius, but Pompeii predates Mount Vesuvius. So set the context of what was Pompeii. Was it a trading town? Was it a district headquarters? What was Pompeii?
It was a trade point, a port. The origins date back to the Etruscan period. It was a kind of a mixture between Greek population, local populations, Etruscans that were at the edge of what is considered now Etruria. And at some point, they start to be part of this Roman growing power in central Italy. And in the end, they are absorbed. And they become a colony in 80 BC, super recently. They are in contact for so many years with Rome until they become a colony. And what we see in Pompeii, I think, is a prime example of this interconnected world that we can find in Josephine's book, because you go to Pompeii and you don't see a Roman city. You see an Etruscan city, you see an Oscan city, you see the remains of the Greek population in Pompeii, you see people using different languages, you see objects from different parts of the Roman world and different chronologies, and they were co-living and coexisting, even in terms of beliefs, until this huge eruption took place in 79 CE. And the date is still debated. It's super interesting because it was thought to have happened in August. Then they moved the date towards October, because a combination of archaeology with the two letters that we have from Pliny the Younger. And recently, I think a month ago, a new article from Pompeii Archaeological Park was out saying that perhaps still the date could be August, and we are not sure about that.
Because of the harvest, because of the wine and the grapes and everything that was then found recently.
They were finding coins that were issued later, that then, especially the harvest, we're finding like the wine being ready to be just sold, and so many other goods that are produced in September.
And over what time period did the eruption happen? Was it just one big bang? Did people not know it's going to happen? Did people flee for cover? What happened?
I mean, it took longer than a day. We believe that this happened instantly and everyone died. Not everyone died. We know now that over 90% of the population were able to run away, to flee, to resettle in the northern part of the map that you see there. And they had time to leave the city because there were earthquakes. And this took time, like over a day, to just cover all the city with the ashes that you can see in this picture. We have other cities nearby, like Herculaneum, that was completely destroyed under 30 meters of volcanic materials. It's not lava, as we also see out there. It's like a flood of volcanic materials. But in the case of Pompeii, for 24, 30 hours, we had this kind of lapilli, small stones that as you can see in the picture, and the ash falling and covering the city. And this is why also, if we consider this context of discoveries in 1738, 1748, this is why archaeologists decided to focus on the city of Pompeii, because it's really easy to remove these materials and to find the objects as you are seeing here. These pictures are from the Archaeological Park of Pompeii, that they are doing now an amazing job putting everything live. And you can see how they find everything. They find objects in place. You can still see the remains of the eruption there in that bronze object. You can see how the paintings are being covered. And this is what is left after years of restoration, reconstruction, and amazing archaeology that is giving us a lot of details and data to write art history, social history in the Roman world.
This is a bathhouse.
This is the Villa of the Mysteries outside Pompeii, 800 meters to the north. And this is one of the huge houses that so many rich families had outside of Pompeii. This one is especially important because of this mysterious, enigmatic painting that we do have here that has a Bacchic character, and some scholars have related to religion, some others have related to social activity, and it's a kind of like interplay between human beings or people that could
But
be
no sex
identified.
here. There's
Sorry?
no sex. There's no pornography.
In this one, no. In this one, no. In other ones, in Pompeii, yes, you have so many. This also is from the recent excavations of Regio 5 and Regio 9. And this shows how this town was completely stopped over this kind of 24, 30 hours of destruction, and how we recover all the material. So this is a kind of a prime example of how archaeology can inform ancient history and how both disciplines can work together to get to know what was going on here in this city. And then the objects, that is important. In the previous pictures, you saw all of these spaces that were empty, because obviously, for obvious reason, you have to take the objects back to the museum to preserve them, to curate them. But objects have a lot of meaning, in my opinion, sometimes even more than architecture, because they have different biographies. And this is an example of how they are also rewriting history. The one on your right was found also outside Pompeii, and it was associated to a woman who was wearing that. And it says, from the master to the slave, it would be the roughly translation. So scholars were interpreting that she was a prostitute, a slave. But to be honest, we'll never be able to know whether or not she was a prostitute, because she was just perhaps wearing that at the second-hand use. Perhaps she bought that in GLF market last year, and she was wearing that at the moment of fleeing Pompeii. But it's important to see how also there is a lot of identity, a lot of content here in terms of social space, how some people were belonging to others. And the one on the left is also telling an amazing story, because it's the one coming from the House of the Golden Bracelet. This was found in a context of people also running away or taking shelter in this house. But it's super interesting, because also in this house they found 2 coins that were super controversial for this kind of debate on the date of their eruption. But the bodies that were wearing this bracelet, now we know that traditionally they were interpreted as a family. It was a man, a woman, a child, and now we know that they are not related based on DNA. So this gives us a lot of information of what I was telling you before, when we have to go back to our own interpretations, acknowledge our bias, and apply new techniques and new analysis to see what is going on there. Probably they were running away. They were not a family. They were not the owners of the house. But still, the fact that they got these objects, that they were not a family, and that even the man was wearing this bracelet, is giving us a lot of clues about how jewelry was used in antiquity, and how we are applying some modern analogies somehow still when we are interpreting archaeological data. These are parts of the victims that you find in Pompeii when you are excavating. This is also from the excavations of Regio 5 in 2018. Basically, this is how we have been finding like thousands of bodies. And in some of them, probably you have seen these pictures where they are, you can see still the expressions, these plaster casts of the victims of Pompeii. This is how we find all the victims of Pompeii. In some cases, we have enough space around the bones to inject materials and get these plaster casts that are also a testimony of the last minutes of this drama and tragedy when they were dying, and that allows you also to face these last moments of life of the people. And then the objects, again, to connect this to how objects move, people move. This was a city that was at the center of the Roman world, but that was in connection with other parts of the Mediterranean and beyond the Roman world. This is an amphora from a wine shop of Pompeii with a writing on it that is saying, you should take this to the shop of Euxinus, the winekeeper, because, and it's also said that it's located near the amphitheater of Pompeii. So this is a way also showing how, when they were bringing goods, there were people wanting specific products that were coming from outside parts, in this case of Pompeii. We do have wine from other parts of the Roman world in Pompeii, and we do have, for example, coins from Hispania, from Iberia. We do have so many objects that were connected to these other people and these other cultures. Probably you know this, some of you know this, but they also had some kind of objects from India in Pompeii. So I think that's where we are moving now. We found, well, archaeologists found this in 1938. And it's a unique example, not only in Pompeii, but also in the Roman world, because initially they found this on the back part of a house, just broken in small pieces in what was looking like a small cabinet with other pieces of goods. So they interpret this like, okay, these were like a few objects that were treasured in a private part of this back garden of the house in the peristyle. And when they took this to the lab, they started to realize that this was not a Greco-Roman or a Hellenistic sculpture they were used to find or in Pompeii. They started to see that this was looking like an Indian sculpture. So we have Amadeo Maiuri in the 20th century interpreting this as a Lakshmi from India. And this is one interesting case study. You can now see the restored sculpture, as you can see at the right, at the Naples Museum. It's a tiny piece of what archaeology believe it was either a table or a mirror. We don't know that. It has some signs in the sculpture. And with time and with more evidence found here in India, we now know that it's not a Lakshmi and that it's coming specifically probably from the northwestern part of India, and it reached Pompeii through these routes that we saw at the beginning with the map. And we know that near Pompeii, for example, in Puteoli, there was a group of Nabateans that were traders bringing goods from other parts of the Roman Empire. And probably this sculpture came as part of this trade activity. If we go to the previous slide, we have these graffitis that were also found in the same house, close to the spot where the sculpture was found. That is giving us a hint about the identity of these people, if not traders, the family who was owning the house or the family who were living in this house. They were connected to this world that was based on trade. Pompeii was a port city full of Greeks, Oscans, Roman people trading, and this was part of their daily life. So I believe that there were other objects coming from India that we haven't labeled as Indian, and probably they are still in the deposits of Pompeii to be found, or will found them. But this is part of this interconnected world of objects full of meanings that somehow some people could decode. Perhaps the owners of the house knew that this was coming from India, knew the significance in terms of iconography this had for the people, and for others it would be something exotic that was really valued. We have Pliny the Elder saying that they were valuing a lot all the stones and all the objects coming from India because they were expensive and they were investing a lot of money on that. So this is a prime
before I
example.
open it up for questions, I wanted to end with this and coming back to the idea, Josephine, of how ideas travel. Explain what this is.
So this is one of the many ways in which India made the West. Just as there are many different ways to write down the same language, there are many ways to write down the same numbers. And if you're Greek, ancient Greek, you're going to use the letters of the alphabet to write it down. If you're an ancient Roman, you're going to use a kind of tally system, those Roman numerals that you still see. They actually borrowed them from the Etruscans. But the thing that both of those do is you basically just add up what's in front of you. So an enormous advance on that is made by Babylonians, first of all, talking back in the Bronze Age, who invent this thing called positional notation. And that's where you have different columns of numbers meaning different powers. So if you have 1, 1, it doesn't mean 2 as it would for the Romans or the Greeks. It means 11. But actually, for the Babylonians, it didn't mean 11. 1, 1 would mean 61 because they used the base 60 system for counting. It's hugely useful in a lot of ways. So we still use it. Now, for the minutes in an hour, for the seconds in a minute, for the months in a year in a sort of derived way, for the circles, the degrees in a circle. 60 is an incredibly useful number because it divides by so many other numbers. However, it's not very useful for maths. It's very useful for daily life, not very useful for maths. That's where the Indian mathematicians come in. So back in the Iron Age, they change this. They take over the positional notation from the Babylonians, and they change it to base 10. So now 1, 1 really does mean 11. And then they also invent numbers. The numbers, and you can see here sort of one version of how they develop, but actual, not just tallies or wedges and so on, but actual numbers to write down. That's an Indian invention. And then, on top of that, they invent zero. So now we're in the kind of CE period, around about maybe 400, 500, could be a bit earlier. They start putting a dot in one of these columns. So now you know that 1-1 is definitely 11, not 101, because you can see where numbers are missing. And gradually that dot kind of gets bigger, it gets a kind of circle inside it, and it becomes our zero. And it's also Indian mathematicians who are inventing ways of using this zero. So it's not just a notational thing. It's not just, oh, that's 11, or that's 101, not 11. It's also something you can use in mathematics. And that's why all the way through the ancient period, Indian mathematics is the most advanced in the whole of the world, something that we yet know about. And it is lapped up by European people when it finally arrives in Europe with the Arabs.
And we'll hear more about that in the Williams session, about the Fibonacci numbers. Let's take a quick few questions. Go ahead. We'll take them in clusters because we only have a few minutes and Josephine has another session which he may have forgotten. Quick question and then the mic again at the back. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for this panel. Josephine, I wanted to ask you about the question of identity. Obviously, before the invention of the West, before the invention of nation states, and sort of like the early modern medieval period, we talk about historiographically the idea of the cosmopolis, the Persian cosmopolis, the Sanskrit cosmopolis, etc. And even if you speak Greek and I speak Persian, maybe there are social contexts and signifiers by which we relate. And so I was wondering, with your time period and with your sources beyond the material history, is there anything that indicates to you how people were self-identifying or identifying
So identity,
in relationship?
Next question at the back there, quickly. Yep, short question, please.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. I have a very short question is actually that I really like the idea that, India made the West. But if you take a global perspective, for example, you see, for example, how huge the impact is of India on China with the spread of Buddhism.
So India impact on China and Buddhism, and the third?
One final thing is also a huge impact on Southeast Asia. So compared to these two, the impact is rather minor, I would say, on the West. So why is that?
And the other one last question.
Basically, my question is to question modern conceptions of what constitutes art. For example, if you go back in prehistory, you'll find flint knap tools with fossils embedded in them and points that are unrealistically detailed that simply can't be used. And obviously, all the culture
What
and art
represents
that we have,
art? Got it. So who wants to take which? Go ahead.
I'll take the first one, and I'll have a quick go at the second one. So the first one on identity. One thing that's absolutely fascinating to me as a historian is just how little evidence there is for that kind of self-identity in antiquity, which is not to say there's none. You do get moments. People are often very attached to their cities. For instance, it's very common to find people identifying in terms of their families or their fathers, sometimes their mothers too. But there's really very little evidence for either things we now call ethnic identity. You get it from time to time, spots of it here and there, but it's unusual. There's also very little evidence for what I would call kind of sort of gendered sexual identity. These are very kind of modern ideas, and it's not. I don't think that the issue is that the identities themselves are a kind of modern idea. It's more like the whole idea of self-identity is a modern one. I mean, a lot of people would say it goes back to St. Augustine, and that to me is pretty modern. But he writes his confessions, it's all sort of interiority, it's all ruminating on himself. And that's actually a huge change in world literature. It's an amazing contribution in a way. Before that, it's just not something, it's not many people's hobby to think about the sort of journey of themselves, if you like, in that way. It's one of the things I really like about antiquity. It gives us an out on this. We don't have to have an ethnic identity, a sexuality, or whatever it might be. We can choose what we want to be, but we can also just choose not to. So that's identity. I'll have a quick go at the absolutely right on the connections further east. It's sort of at different periods. Often it looks like Indian commerce is looking in one direction or the other. But that story, which wasn't mine to tell, but that story I really recommend our friend and colleague William Dalrymple's book, The Golden Road, which absolutely tells those stories and is brilliant.
Rubén, you want to say why art is important and what constitutes art?
Well, I hear the question will be like, we do have in Roman archaeology an amazing word that says, what is Roman in Roman art? Because at the end of the day, Rome was that interconnected that we have been labeling things wrong as Roman art, and we have been making judgments, and I think we can apply this case to what is art in general. We have been building this art history in the 19th century mostly, also the end of the 18th century, influenced by this aesthetic approach to evidence. So what is art? Art to me is any visual representation of manifestation that we could find in material culture. And we have always to go back and to reassess how we have been labeling things, because you could go to prehistory and you could find a lot of data that has been disregarded because it was not looking like people were thinking. And it is also linking to the idea of how the world made the West. We have been making things through our own bias and specific cultural context. And I think we need to think outside the box in terms, in this case, of a style of manifestation from cultures to see art as from a more broader perspective.
Sorry, we've run out of time, but thank you so much. And for those of you who think the whole idea of all roads lead to Rome, much of the Roman Empire was actually run from the east for a lot of the time in modern day Turkey or Istanbul. So it's a fascinating construct of how ideas traveled. Thank you so much, Rubén. Thank you so much, Josephine. They have more sessions so you can unpack more ideas. Thank you.